Now, allow me to welcome Gina Latendresse, the president of American Pearl Company Incorporation of Nashville, Tennessee, to talk to us about the story of natural pearls from the Americas.
Yes, so in 1949, my father, John Latendresse, began collecting natural pearls up and down the Tennessee and Mississippi rivers. And as a little girl, of course, I followed in his footsteps. I just realized I didn't have a little clicker. Oh, here we go. Tell me which one. On this one. Okay, all right, sorry. So I followed him around as a little girl starting at the age of 8. So here we go on our American Pearl journey. So I interchange the word mollusk, shell, and mussels quite often, so I just wanted to clarify that because sometimes I confuse people. So the American story literally begins with the indigenous people. The American Indians collected these shells for food, ornamental purposes, and for currency long before Columbus arrived. Ooh. So, in fact, the Hopewell Indian mounds in the state of Ohio were discovered, and in the mounds were thousands of pearls dating back over 2,000 years. Pearls like these. And these. So unfortunately, they're quite decomposed because of the time and the burial. But some of them are quite large, as you can see. So in 1492, when Columbus sailed, the objective was to find gold, spices, and pearls. And by the early 1500s, thousands of pearls were being exported. They were enriching the cargoes of fleets of Spanish ships crossing the Atlantic, and the Americas became known as the Land of Pearls. Uh-oh. You literally touch this and it like snaps forward. So it's along the coastline from Venezuela all the way to Panama. It was considered the Pearl Coast. It's a 500-mile span. Of course, those were saltwater pearls at that time. One of the most famous of the American pearls is La Peregrina. So it's a little over 50 carats and 1 inch. It was discovered off the coast of Panama in mid-1550s, and it was sold to King Philip II of Spain. In 1969, Richard Burton bought it for Elizabeth Taylor for a birthday gift, and it just recently sold in 2011 for $11.3 million. Just the one pearl. So many believe that La Peregrina was adorning Mary Tudor, Queen of England, also daughter of King Henry VIII, in this portrait. But there's some research that's been done that thinks that perhaps she had passed away before La Peregrina was even sold to King Philip. But in 1606, you can see that Queen Margaret of Austria, King Philip III's wife, is wearing the pearl here. So in 1597, Spain received over 350 pounds of pearls from the Venezuelan coastline valued at $3.2 million. So this also assumes that the pearls would be 3 grains each. If the pearls were estimated at 8 grains, the number would have been more like 9.6 million. So as we move forward in time and on up the coast into North America, we find the Savannah. This is where I had my red dot. I don't know when. Here it is. So this is the Savannah River area here. And from the stories that were told by De Soto, this area, there was a temple that was discovered that was covered in shells. And in the center of this temple were chests full of pearls, so full that it would take 900 men to carry out. Perhaps, whoopsie. Okay, sorry. I don't know why it's going away. Perhaps a chest full of pearls like this. Now, some say that might have been an exaggerated account, but nevertheless, the pearls made a notable impression. So not much is known between the 1540s and 1850. Until 1857, a shoemaker by the name of David Howell goes collecting mussels for dinner. He finds a 100-carat pearl. He had already cooked his dinner, so the pearl was damaged, unfortunately, but it was estimated to be worth around $25,000. I'm guessing that was the most expensive meal he ever cooked. Shortly after that, a carpenter by the name of Jacob found a 39-grain pearl, sold it to Charles Tiffany for $1,500, later sold to the Empress of France for $10,000. It was named the Queen Pearl. You can imagine those two people were not far from each other on a very small river called the Passaic River in New Jersey. The local people went crazy. There was a pearl frenzy. They even closed the schools so that children could go pearl hunting. So here's the area, just to give you perspective. This is Manhattan Island here, and up here in New Jersey is the Passaic River. And near Patterson is right where those two pearls were found, in that area. So in the summer of 1889, approximately $300,000 worth of pearls were found on the Wisconsin River. I point this out because that's just one river in the United States. We have many. And in 1890, it was recorded that a shipment went to London of Wisconsin pearls. And as you can see, 93 pieces for $100,000. Oh. So you didn't know you were going to get a geography lesson of the United States today, did you? So Savannah River area, not far from where I grew up in Tennessee. This is Tennessee here. The Tennessee River extends all the way down into Alabama and back up. And this is Wisconsin here. So it's on the upper Mississippi area. Uh-oh. Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry. So by 1901, many pearl fisheries had developed, and as you can see, we had an array of colors. Why? We have over 300 species of freshwater mollusks in the United States. Most of them produce white pearls, but we do have this beautiful color range as well. So it's very worthwhile to talk about the mussels. So when the adults, when the eggs are fertilized, they form a glochidium, this little microscopic organism here, which attach to the gills of fish. Now they live as parasites for 6 months to 1 year on the gills of local fish. They can't survive otherwise. So when they're ready to drop down and begin a pearl bed, or an a mussel bed, perhaps all of them will drop off. And what if they're all males that drop off in this mussel bed? What happens then? Well, they're so unique that 50% of them will turn into females in order to reproduce. They're hermaphrodites. So this is the little baby mussels living on the gills of fish. Why? Because they're filter feeders. They need oxygen, and they're also getting their food while they're living there for the first year of their life. So by 1904, people were leaving their jobs, factorymen their mills, farmers leaving their crops, merchants leaving their stores, all wanting their hands in finding these natural gems. And instead of the pearls being exported to Europe, the New Yorkers came down to the local river people and traded them, keeping them in the U.S. This statistics comes from the Coons and Stevenson Book of the Pearl. I put this up here. There's many numbers that he lists in there, but I put the Persian Gulf in the U.S. because that was relevant for what we were talking about. But we can look at that number of fishermen here, the pearl value, and the shell. And we look at the shell value at $350,000. Many of you probably can guess why. Buttons. Mother of pearl buttons. So the shell was worth way more money. So in order to collect our mussels off the lakes and rivers, we had to use, back at the time, there were free divers, but there were also what they call braille boats. So these braille boats would literally use the current of the river or the stream and drop down these rafts, and on the ends were little finger-like projections that would roll across the bottom of the rivers. And at a certain time, they would pull them up and all the mussels would be attached, because as the mussels are filter feeding, they clamp down on anything that passes by or disturbs the water, and so they would bring them up. Consequently, this form of mussel shelling is no longer available. It is illegal because it also ruins the bottom of the ecosystem of the rivers and lakes. That didn't happen until the 60s and 70s. Now we have regulations in that each species has their own size ring. So if the shell fits through the size ring, it must go back into the natural habitat until it is mature enough. So this is a typical shell camp in the late 1800s. So at the shell camp, they would have been harvesting what they call cooking out, and also the locals would have their hand in it. Now, there's something called toe digging. You would literally walk out into the lake or river up to as far as you could go. I'm only 5 feet tall, so I couldn't go very far. And you would dip your feet down into the mucky bottom of the lake or river and fish for these mussels and pull them out. So that's called toe digging. So we were already talking about what we were doing with the shells in terms of recycling. They were using them as the buttons for the button industry. We were collecting the pearls, of course. And the mussel meat, what did we do with this mussel meat laying around? Well, it was fed to hogs. So we gave it or sold it to hog farmers. So there was this nice story about a hog farmhand, who would go through the mussel muck and stuff from the pig pens every week, months after months. Eventually, he found a pearl. He went to New York and sold it for $5,000. Of course, how do we find natural pearls? They're byproducts of industries, button industry being one, and the next one being the nucleus for cultured pearls all around the world. So these shells are harvested from our lakes and rivers, sliced, diced, and milled into round beads. Today, our nucleus that comes from the United States is still the most valuable and important nucleus for cultured pearls, ranging from 2 to 20 millimeters. The shell is also used for inlay or for decorative uses, so we find natural pearls along those lines. The 1 in 10,000 is the number that was published by Coons and Stevenson, but I think in the last presentation that number seems to be quite different. Nevertheless, you would still shuck through mussels, mollusks, shells in piles like this. So there was a story, a gentleman came to visit me. I had known him from my childhood, and he had retired. He said, I'd been diving for 30 years, and he was interested in selling his collection. I said, great, I would love to see you. So he came to visit, and he poured his pearls out onto my desk. Oh dear, come on. So I was astounded because he was a pearl diver for 30 years up and down the Tennessee River, and I said, is this all that you have? He said, yes, ma'am. Best one gave to my wife, and your daddy, I sold him to him a few times here and there. But for the most part, this is the bulk of what I collected over 30 years. So to me, this whole collection was priceless because it shows the 1 in 10,000, 30 years of growth, very little yield. I bought it along with the pickle jar. So the necklace you see here, this picture was from August 1985, National Geographic, and this necklace represents 25 years of my father gathering natural pearls from the Tennessee River, round shape. It took him that long to create just the one necklace. My mom is wearing the other one, and I actually have that necklace on today. So, the many variety and beautiful shapes that we have of the U.S. pearls. One is the wing shape. They also are called feathers, dog tooth, leaf, petal, or tooth shapes. Sometimes they're flat. Nice wing. Tiffany chrysanthemum brooch. My father sold so many of these to Tiffany's way back when. Lalique used them in his Art Nouveau pieces. They were buds in this design. Whimsically created, William Rooser in the 1950s and 60s. Or angel wings. One of my favorites is the rosebud. So it's actually several pearls that have fused together. It's a nice piece. And you can really see the nice bulbous or barnacle rosebud, as we call them. So the turtleback should be flat on the backside and domed on the top. Doesn't have to be a perfect oval, can be kind of a baroque oval as well. We have many other very baroque organic shapes that don't really have specific names. The swirl or the snail pearl. Some baroque drops. Or some used as bodice of animals. I don't know if I said it before, but I wanted to make sure I did. Of our many natural pearls that are collected, only 5% of them are symmetrical, and only 1% of them are going to be perfectly round. A high dome, button. So I used this slide to tell a story. Back in the 1950s, my father was visiting his colleague and mentor, Morris Hanauer, in New York City, and Morris had just received a phone call from Tiffany and Company that said they needed 100 pair of the little natural wing pearls. And so Morris said, I have this important meeting to go to. Do you mind making the pairs? And my father said, sure, I'll help you out. So Morris went off to lunch for a couple of hours, and he came back, and my dad only had a couple of pairs. And Morris said, Johnny, why haven't you got more pairs than this? It's been a couple of hours. And my father was very excited voice said, Morris, you can't believe these natural pearls don't match up. None of them are alike. None of them are perfectly matched. And Morris looked at him and said, there is a head between two ears, and I hope that's true in your case. Go back and use your head and make some pairs. And so he did. So this is what we call a snail formation. It's theorized that parasitic snails or worms can infiltrate mussels or oysters, and in this case, forming a natural pearl. We estimate this pearl to have been growing around 70 years. It's 4 centimeters, 80 carats. We see these nice pink colorations. Again, it's because of the interior of the shell. I have to go over a few other pearls other than what we have in the freshwater that come from the North American region. So along the east coast here of the United States, we're going to find the quahog, producing these interesting colors here. Now these pearls don't have the lustrous nature that the American freshwater pearls have. These are more of the porcelain surface. Sometimes they have pattern. That doesn't make them more valuable. It's just an interesting note. The most famous is the 14 millimeter Gouache brooch, the largest lavender quahog. Oh, we go along the west coast over here, and we find the abalone, a marine gastropod, producing the most beautiful blue, green, goldeny colored natural pearls. Very Baroque usually. And then you can find some real large ones. So this one's 266 carats, and it's 80 millimeters long. Down into the Gulf Coast, the queen conch, with their pink pearls emerging here. Of course, pink with flame is the most valuable. I point this out because these are fakes. A lot of fakes are put into jewelry where they're face up nice pink with the flame structure. But if you look closely, this is the same pearl, and it's turned over, you can see the growth structure in it. And here, this is the growth structure in this pearl here. This is a little bit better. From the top, you can see these are pink, but on the side, you can see this growth structure of the shell. It's carved from the shell. That's why you have the same RI and you have the same flame structure as the pearls. So hinge pearls, we hear this quite often in the trade. Hinge pearls are not real pearls. They're actually mother of pearl cut from the actual hinge of this particular area here. These hinge pearls are cut from this type of shell. This is called a purple pimpleback, one of our 300 species. Whoops, sea daisy. Okay. And these are cut from a white hinge here. And these would be fake wing pearls, which is this part of the shell here that's been cut out. But if you saw the back of it, you would see that it is shell on the backside. I hope the next time that you go fishing for pearls, you'll think of American pearls to add to your collection. And I have to thank my parents, John and Gina Latendresse, because without them, I wouldn't be here today. So thank you.